without deviation.
How do you do that?
No.
I mean, how do you focus that intensely? Because I often have trouble. Like,
Yeah.
I get overwhelmed sometimes when I have a lot of work, and the worst feeling is like when I feel like I have a ton of work and I do work all day, but I still feel like I didn't get anything done.
Yeah. Yeah, but you
And I feel that
probably
all the
did.
time.
You probably did.
Probably.
Are you a conscientious person? Do you know?
I don't even know what
How do you-
exactly that means.
Yeah,
Oh,
how do you define that?
Well, okay, so that's another thing we could mention briefly. I have a website called understandmyself.com, and I set up a coupon code for your viewers.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
what is
So
it?
it's H3H3.
Oh,
What
cool.
say that
So,
you are the domain again?
Understandmyself.com.
Okay.
And you can go there and take a personality test that was devised in my lab. The main researcher was Dr. Colin DeYoung, who is now a professor at the University of Minnesota. But we took the standard Big Five trait model, which is the standard modern personality model. So that's extroversion, which is a positive emotion dimension. And extroverted people are enthusiastic and assertive. So you're both enthusiastic. You're really assertive. That would be my guess.
I can be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you wouldn't be doing this sort of thing if,
Yeah,
if you weren't
okay.
extroverted,
Okay,
right?
sure, yeah.
So because you're verbally fluent and you like to engage in that sort of thing. So that's a positive emotion dimension. It's associated with the positive emotion that you feel when you're moving towards desired things. And the next dimension is sometimes it's called neuroticism and sometimes it's called
Lots of
negative
that.
emotionality. Well,
Big on neuroticism.
people who are high in neuroticism have some anticipatory anxiety. You have anticipatory anxiety if you're worried about going somewhere
Yep.
and it really bugs you, and then you get there and like 20 minutes later you're calm and it's okay.
Big time.
Every
yeah.
single time.
Big time. Every week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's withdrawal. That's an aspect of neuroticism known as withdrawal. And the
knew
other aspect is volatility, and volatile people are touchy and irritable.
Huh.
So, and that's the second dimension. The third dimension is agreeableness, and agreeable people are compassionate and polite, and disagreeable people are competitive and blunt. And so women are higher in agreeableness than men.
Yeah.
So if you take a random man and a random woman out of the population, general population, and you bet on who was more agreeable, if you bet on the woman, you'd be right 60% of the time. And the other place where men and women differ is with trait neuroticism. Women are more susceptible to anxiety and depression. So if
But how can you say that if genders don't exist?
well, yeah, that's another thing that I'm genuinely accused of, is that biological essentialism.
Yeah,
And then,
but I feel like I experiencing those different feelings depending on the day.
yeah,
Sometimes I'm more extroverted. Some days I'm more reclusive. Is it generally?
that's probably volatility too. It's like variation in mood. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah. So have you ever had periods of depression?
Yeah.
How long? I mean, you don't have to tell me.
No, I can tell
obviously.
you. It's okay. In college, I'd say a couple years.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a long time. Well,
Yeah.
so that would be an indication. Well, it could be an indication of many things, but that's often associated with higher levels of trait neuroticism. Because you see, it isn't obvious how much negative emotion you should feel. Like, let's say you wake up in the morning and you have an ache in your side. It's like, well, is that nothing or cancer? Well, you don't know. Like, you shouldn't jump to the whole cancer conclusion.
Right.
But Ethan
would.
would.
Immediately.
Well, but you can't tell, eh? Like, it's not necessary. Like, and you think, well, if it is cancer and you miss it, well, that's not so good.
Yeah.
So sometimes there's some utility in being on edge all the time, especially in a dangerous
Sure.
environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next dimension is conscientiousness, and conscientious people are industrious, and so they're guilty if they're not working. They have to work.
Yeah, I have
That's
that.
me.
You're like that.
Me
Yeah,
too. It's
you too.
brutal. It's awful. I
brutal.
hate it
Yeah,
because I'm very
Yeah.
self-aware of it. Like, I feel like I can never relax.
Right.
And I feel like I
Yeah.
never got anything done.
right. Okay,
Never
so we
satisfied.
figured out why that is.
Yeah.
Okay, the reason is you're conscientious, so that's associated often with feelings of shame or guilt if you haven't got what you should have got done. And then if you're also high in negative emotion, then you worry about that. So, so that can be rough. And the last dimension is openness, and openness is basically interest in ideas and creativity, essentially. And so if you take this test at understandmyself.com, it will tell you where you are in relationship to 10,000 other people on those dimensions. And it's useful for we're going to make a couples version of it so that you'll get we haven't got it up yet, so you'll have a report saying, well, you're really orderly and you're not, and so you're going to have tension in your relationship because the orderly person is always going to be annoyed by your disorderliness and end up cleaning up after you all the time. And so you're going to have to be aware of that, because that's going to be, and you're open and your partner isn't. Well, you're going to want to go to plays and movies and read books and discuss ideas, and they're not going to be interested in that at all. And, you kind of think of those as opinions, but they're really deeply rooted.
No, it sounds... So, are we doomed to just possess these characteristics that we hate about ourselves, even if we're self-aware of it? How do you address these issues of self-improvement?
Okay, well, people get more conscientious and less neurotic and more agreeable as they get older. So you could think about that perhaps as the development of wisdom. I also think that you can learn the opposite traits through practicing micro habits. So, for example, in my clinical practice, I've often had introverted people who need to act in an extroverted way in order, say, to be successful lawyers, because they have to go out and drum up business. They have to meet with people.
Right.
And they can learn the habits of an extroverted person, but they have to learn them from the bottom up. It's not natural to them. And if you're not very conscientious, for example, like a schedule is learning how to use a schedule and then learning how to stick to it can be really useful, as can making a life plan.
I feel like I've gone through that with our YouTube channel and the podcast, because I was usually not in front of the camera, and I'm very uncomfortable with it, and so I've learned how to be more extroverted, I think. Yeah. By like being on video and
sheer will of force.
Yeah. Well, I've watched a number of your videos, and you're clearly more introverted than Ethan, and I can see I can see it in your body language, because you kind of pull back and you're more hesitant to jump into a conversation. Yeah. And but you have a fair bit of positive emotion. You smile a lot. so that's that might also make it somewhat easier. But my guess is you're far lower in assertiveness than Ethan. So
see, that's interesting. Hila can be pretty. She can be pretty scary. It's that Israeli in her.
Yeah.
But in public or in private?
It depends.
Don't push her.
Yeah.
It could be in public.
Yeah.
Depends.
Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting.
I want to take the test, because my issue is like, I'm aware of my flaws. I'm aware of the things that drive me crazy, but I'm not really sure how to improve it. Right? I don't know. Maybe that's the problem, is that I don't know how to instruct myself to improve.
Well, one of the things, so I have this other program that's the future authoring program I mentioned. Okay, so the way it works is that it first of all asks you to think about your life along 6 or 7 dimensions. Okay, so here's the idea. Imagine you were treating yourself like someone you were taking care of, someone you loved and you were taking care of. Okay, so you want the best for you, whatever that is. So it's not like magic wishes. It's nothing like that. It's you're taking care of yourself like a responsible person. Okay, so then it asks you, write a bit. 3 to 5 years down the road, what do you want your friendship network to look like? How do you want your intimate relationship to be going? Or what should it look like? How are you going to stay educated? How are you going to handle temptations of drugs and alcohol? How are you going to keep yourself healthy mentally and physically? What are your career goals? And what are you going to do with life outside of work? So if you could have what would be good for you, just what would that look like? Okay, people aren't encouraged to take the time to think that through, and it really matters if you think it through. Okay, so then it says, okay, now you've warmed up. Write for 20 minutes about what your life could look like in 3 to 5 years if it was going the way that you wanted it to go. So it'd be good for you. Be good for you, good for your family, good for society. Like, it'd be good. You need a vision. Okay, and then the next step is, okay, now imagine that you let your weaknesses and character flaws get the upper hand and like drive you into the ground. What does that look like in 5 years? So that's like a horrific vision, right? And so that's a good thing, because now you got something to run away from. And so if you're anxious, having something bad to run away from is really motivating, because you think, well, like maybe I should watch what I eat. It's like, yeah, well, I'd look better. That's not enough motivation. I'm going to be fat and really unhealthy and half dead in 5 years. It's like, okay, that's not so good. Right. And so you can run towards the positive thing and run away from the negative thing. And that increases your motivation. Right. And then in the next part, you're asked to make that into a detailed and articulated plan. And so that can help. like you say, well, you're not sure what habits to change or what personality traits to transform. You got to kind of think about that in relationship to what you want. So, you know, if people come to me for clinical work, the first thing I want to find out is, okay, what do you think's wrong? Like, how are you suffering unnecessarily? And but more importantly, if your life was good, what would that look like? What are we aiming at here?
Right.
And that's one of the most crucial things that you can ask yourself in life is, what are you aiming at? And here, there's two reasons for that. One is your aim narrows the world, and that reduces your anxiety. You know where you stand and where you're going. And so that calms you down and reduces your stress. It helps you focus. The second thing is the positive emotion systems that make you enthusiastic and engaged. Like, people think of reward as what happens when you achieve something. But that's not exactly right, not with human beings. Most of the time we feel reward engagement and positive, like the positive desire to move forward in life, when there's evidence that we're moving towards a valuable goal. So we're making progress. It's like, yes, we're making progress. There's a real neurochemical kick that comes along with that. It's the same system that cocaine affects and amphetamines. And so with rats, for example, you can get rats hooked on cocaine if they're alone in a cage. And they'll self-administer cocaine till they die. But if they're out doing rat things with their rat buddies, like, they're not that interested in cocaine. So, and the reason I'm saying that is because, like, a rat who's out with his rat buddies doing rat things gets enough reward from that, so the drugs aren't that attractive. So part of the reason that people take drugs like cocaine is because they're not doing enough things that are deeply meaningful, you know. And so, but you don't get meaning unless you got an aim, because your nervous system is wired to give you a pat on the back when you're making progress towards your aim. Well, so you got to have an aim. And, like, the aim should be high, because otherwise why bother with it? But it should also be broken down into steps that you have a reasonably high probability of attaining. You know, with a kid, you want to say, well, you're trying to get your kid to develop. You don't give them an impossible task. You give them a task that's slightly harder than that which they can already do. Right? And so they're engaged by that. Maybe they're a little anxious about it, but they master it, and they've expanded their domain of competence. It's no game. It's a big deal to do that. And that kids love that. That's where you learn, in that zone, you know, where you're pushing yourself just a little bit beyond where you are. And so one of the things that you can do that helps focus you and also control your stress is to really, really consciously think through and articulate your aims. And this program does that for people. And I would also say, if people are interested in it, that's also discounted for you guys, by the way, that you should do a bad job of it. And the reason I'm saying that is because you don't want to be perfectionistic about this. You're not going to be right anyways. You're going to be righter than you are now. Because what do you know? You take a few steps forward 6 months from now, you're not going to be in the same place. And so your vision's going to change a little bit. So there's no sense getting obsessive about your goal. But it really is worthwhile to understand what it is that you're aiming at. People are aiming creatures. That's why we look at each other's eyes, right? That's why you have whites in your eyes, actually. And so that I can see where they're pointing, so I can understand what you're up to. So we're aiming creatures.